Alrighty, so let's do our last part for 6.1, which is just to handle the table display on the conditions we're looking for and do a sort on the entries. So let's start in the index by taking the table back to where we started, which was none, and displaying the no saved entries. So in the index, I'm going to come up here, and right now where it's table, I'm going to put none. And then where it's entries, I'm going to put, I think this was block. Let's see if that works. I have a breakpoint. I have cleared any data that I have in there. And so now I'll just let this run. Let's see, where do I have the breakpoint at this point? Okay, good. Seems like I don't. So what I should see by default is your saved entries, but no entries found. Okay, no entries saved yet. Okay, so let's think about now how we want to control the displaying of the table, right? So this would be handled in the table render. Okay, so let's go down here, and it would be handled on our render table. Okay, but before we get there, remember that issue I talked to you about before, and let's actually just see this. So let's just keep it as default because it's easier. And actually, I think this. Okay, so what by default now we know that it's not going to display the table, but it will display the last entry, okay? And that we can see we have one entry in there. So let's actually do that one first. So in what condition do we want the table to display? Okay, well, wouldn't we want it to be if we had save entries, right? So how would we do that? Well, before we iterate, okay, over this, we could say if entries, remember length, which is how much data, how many entries are in the array. That's what .length gives us. Well, if it's equal to, strictly equal to 0, which means there's no data in there, okay? So then in that condition, we'd want to say footprint table.style.display would be equal to none. That's what we'd want happen. That's how we'd want it to look. I have no entries in there. And then the no entries message dot style. Now you might think, well, that's already the way it is. Yes, but our code that we're going to finish writing here will possibly, based on the condition, change this. Okay, so let's just say this. If there's no entries, we would say, okay, no saved entries. Now in this case, and we're just going to put a console.log here to let us remember no entries to display table hidden. Okay, and that's the condition that we have in this if block. So the condition is I have no data, no objects in my array. So the .length is on the array. It's a method on the array that just looks, is there any objects in there in our particular case? And if that's the case, and this is something we haven't seen yet, just return. And return just control, it sends control back to whatever called it. So it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do this looping. It doesn't do anything. Okay? So we'll just say stop the function here. Okay? So in this case, if this condition is true, right? If there's no data, then stop and return control. Now, else here would be if the else here would represent anything not equal to 0. So anything, in our case, greater than 0, but we don't even have to write that condition because this is going to fall through if it's anything other than 0. So in that case, we want to say footprint table style display equal table. Okay, so now we're flipping it on. We're like, okay, we have some saved data. Let's go ahead and flip that on, and let's say no entries dot style display is equal to, again, we're flipping it. This would be none. So we're saying turn this off, turn this on. Sorry, turn this on, turn this off. Okay, so this is our conditional way of controlling when we see the table headings before, and then we render into those, of course. So let's see this in action. Okay, so now, right now, if I hit refresh, right? Let me just make sure I wrote everything correctly, make sure I have the right day up, and I do. Okay, so let's go to sources, make sure I have the latest copy. Let's come down here, right? So in this case, oh yeah, duh. I was like, why didn't it do it? Because, and this is one of those things you just, as you do it, this is why I've been harping on DevTools, because it made me go in here and go, oh, that's right. This would not get called until what? Until I actually calculate footprint, okay? So right now, I'd come in here, right? I'm going to check, is the length equal to 0? No, it's not. So where is it going to go? It's going to drop to here. It's going to fall through. It's going to say, hey, show, right? Show the table, because right now the table has the headings already hard-coded into the HTML, right? Make the no message display, right? Our no entries, make that go away. And now, just run our content. Cool, right? So in this case, let's just go look. So this did what we wanted it to do, right? We wanted it to actually say if there's entries, then show it and take out the no saved entries. So we know that works the way we want it. Now, back over here, we now have 2 entries in the data, right? So let's actually do, just to kind of show the issue I had talked about before, let's actually, in this case, if there's 2, I'm just going to put 3 here, because just to show you what's going to happen. I'm just going to let this run, okay? So look what happened. We got 3, but we also got what appears to be a duplicate of 1 and 2. And now look at why this is true. We have 3 objects, therefore we should have 3 entries, but we have 2 extra ones. Well, why is that? That is because at the start of the render table, there was already some TRs, some rows and some TDs rendered into the table. So what we need to do, and it's a fairly simple thing to do, but you need to understand why we have to do it, because of the way that render table is functioning. We have to do the following. Okay, in here, matter of fact, let me see, I think I have some content related. There it is, okay? So clear any existing rows to avoid duplicate on re-render. That's what we're about to do. Okay, there we go. In order to do that, all we have to do is call footprint table body inner HTML, and we'll just set that to blank, and in this case a empty string. Okay, and this actually was something we just did right here. If there's no entries, hide it, so it gives us a little content for what's happening there. Okay, cool, right? Cool. Now we're not done by any means, but now let's see how many, right? So in here, we know we have data, and you might be going, well, wait a minute. Why in this case are we getting, and we are, and actually let's just complete the thought before I jump to the next thing. Let's run this again. Okay, and let's just put a number so we'll know 140 people's a lot. Okay, calculate, run. Okay, so we know in this case this is now working because there's 4, right? The length of 4, therefore that is indeed clearing it, which is awesome and what we were hoping to do. But notice what happens here. And let's clear the form. So clear the form clears the form, but still the table is showing, which is awesome. But when we refresh, the table goes away. And the idea of persistent data, right, is what we're looking for. So where would we need to call this render table? And the answer is in the app.js. Matter of fact, I think I have that here. Actually, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, so we'll come and do this here. So under the app.js, let's pull that in. Okay. So this would be under where? Think about what happens when you refresh or load the page. This is the code that runs. Okay. So in here, we would want to then call the table renderer.render table and pass what to it? The carbon footprint entries. So anytime we init, meaning load this function based on listening to the DOM, right? Did everything get loaded? Let's take this off. Let's let this run. Okay, so now, and I'll just show you again, on page load, great. So on page load, and we now have the functionality we're looking for. And if I go over here and clear the data, what should happen is my logic should say exactly. There is no entries, no saved entries. So this is operating the way I want. And there's only one last thing we have to think about now. And it's on this table render, because the thing we're doing is we're taking data, we're saving it to local storage, we're then bringing it back out, right? Remember the stringify and the parse JSON methods. Well, when you do something like that, a variety of things could go wrong. And so one of the things we're going to want to do is to make sure our entries are in the order, right? So in this case, right, let's just hit a couple here to have them, right? Now in this case, because I'm doing it all on the same day, it wouldn't be an issue. But this is one of those edge cases, and it is a good introduction for us for something we haven't covered yet, which is sorting. So what we want to say is on this in memory, right? So in memory, right? This is not in storage, because what we're passing in here has already been from our referenced get item from local storage, right? This entries is in memory. But because we know it came from local storage, what we're going to want to do is set up sorted entries is going to be equal to. Now this syntax, and I'll talk you through it, when you first see it, we'll be like, what? Right? Because what we're going to say is whenever we sort something, this generally will sort the array we're passing it, so it actually changes the original array. And for our particular purposes, we don't want to do that, because there may be a reason for other functionality of our code, but really this step is just saying let's make sure we have the entries sorted by timestamp, right? That's what we want to see. So what we're going to do is create an array literal, right? So we've talked about object literals, now we're doing an array literal, but in this case we're saying this new array is going to, remember this spread operator, take the entries. We're going to call a method called sort. So sort them. So what, and we're not done with the coding here, but what will happen is we'll now have a new array with objects, so an array of objects that represent the sorted version of what was passed here as a check in case something went weird. Okay, and there's a variety of things, and that's probably the thing I'll have you prompt if I didn't or do a little more research. So in this case, this sort has got what we call a callback method. Now we've seen these callback methods before, specifically on event listeners. So what it's going to do what sort does is it's actually going to look at the array. And remember, what's in this array is objects, okay? So we're going to say for each of them, each of the objects, we're going to say, okay, A and B. So in other words, the first item, the first object, and the second object. Okay, so what it's doing is it's doing this, looking at the first one and the second one to figure out what order should be, which should come first, A or B. And that's how computers typically sort. Now we could talk about different kinds of sort, but for today we're just going to do this one, okay? Now, how do we do this? We're going to hit a return. We're going to say return. And what this is going to do, it's going to evaluate, and it'll return either a +1 or I think a 1 or a -1 to figure out which of these should come before the other, right? And in this case, what we're about to write will determine if it's ascending or descending. So what we're going to do, and we've seen this code before, we're going to say new date from B dot timestamp. Now, what does B dot timestamp represent? Okay, so remember, what's in the array is objects. So the first object is A, the second object is B. Now we could have said object 1 and object obj1 and obj2 to make this a little more clear, but this is just syntax you will typically see. So we're going to say, because remember this time step is in milliseconds. So we're going to say minus. So actually subtract the milliseconds for new date. Okay, A dot timestamp. Okay, so whatever so when you compare, so it's going to iterate over however many objects, it'll compare and it'll place the one above, right, if this returns, right, if it returns a negative or a positive. And by the way, if you wanted to do it instead of in the other order, then you'd place A before B in this case, okay? So you'd have A here and B here. So this is just the order. And did I put... Yeah, here we go, okay? I thought I did. Okay, so let's do this. So this is in descending order, and then we spread, okay? So we're using the spread operator, and in this case we call it a shallow copy. And a shallow copy is just the idea that we're going to make a copy of the array, right? So we don't modify the original order, the original array order, in case for some reason we don't want to. So this again is just introducing concepts around programming that are fairly common and good to know how to do, okay? And then we're sorting them. I think I already had that in there. Most recent before render. Okay, now we're not done here. So we're sorting entries by timestamp most recent first before rendering. Okay, so now this code, let's think about, all right, hopefully, and again, I want you to do a little more research about the sort method, and I did pull up MDN just to show you here. And the sort method, the sort method of array instances, in other words, on an array, sorts the element in place. But because of the way we're writing it, it's actually a shallow copy of it. It's not doing, it's not changing this original entries that we're passing it right here. Okay, by doing this step, we're creating a new array that ultimately will be stored in this sorted array, which tells us what it is. Okay, now in this case they were showing very simple sorts. They were just sorting, the strings in an array, numbers in an array. For us, our array is a little more complex because it has objects, and that's why we needed to do the dot or B. Remember this reference, it'll look at the first one, look at the second one. Okay, so again, this is code we haven't seen. It is good to be introduced to at least how we sort. We're doing a shallow sort. We're not affecting the original one. We're going to store this in sorted. And in order to use it, what do we have to modify? We have to modify this. Okay, so this would now be sorted entries. Okay, so we're passing entries. We're doing our logic for how we display, but before we actually go into iterating over them, right, what we're going to do is change, instead of what we're passing, we're going to change the locally scoped sorted entries that we're running sort on, and we're looking for this in descending order, newest first. And let's just make sure now our code actually works. Okay, good. So let's actually do this. And let's do apartment. That's a lot of people in an apartment. Let's do this. Calculate. Good. Good. Okay, so just to see the code itself, and we could actually write some code to see if it changed or not. Kind of not the purpose here. The purpose is really just to say on calculation, right? Run this, and notice if you do, here's the first time it runs through, right? There's our, and we could look at which entry this was, and here's your B. So here's your A and here's your B. Okay, so it shows you B equals A equals, and then what it does here is it looks at that timestamp, okay, right, creates the new object, and then in this case the milliseconds, right, on the, because we're calling new date, and then it's going to return. Okay, and then what we could do is look, actually it doesn't show you. Let's see if it does actually show you. Yeah, it doesn't show you until it's done the resulting array of sorted entries. Okay, it'd be nice to actually have a little more visibility into that, but for now we know it works. Okay, I think that was it for this. Okay, so how does the sorted method work, right? A little more detail about that. I'll add one for why, what was it I talked about? Now I already forgot. Okay, what is a shallow copy? In this case, I will probably have added one more, so check that out. Oh, got an extra H, so do your last commit message and then submit this one, and we'll move on to the last thing, which I'll just give you a little heads up on. Remember how we've been going over here and clearing every time? Well, now we're going to actually code that into our app. We'll do that next.